So, hello everybody. My name is Anna-Sophie Philippi, and I warmly welcome you to today's panel on green shooting, sustainable film and TV production across the Atlantic. I'm a media scientist at Film University in KONRAD in Potsdam, Babelsberg, and there I'm engaged in the so-called Green Initiative at my university. It's an honor for me to host our discussion this evening or afternoon, depending where you are. I thank everybody who dedicated lots of creativity and time to help this become a fruitful debate today. This event is a cooperation between US mission to Germany, the German film funding institution HessenFilm, the US film diplomacy program, American Film Showcase, and last, the institution I'm affiliated, Film University Babelsberg. As such, our discussion today is part, and as you just saw in the video, the short intro, is part of the Transatlantic Innovation Week, initiated by the US Embassy in Germany and organized together with partners all over Germany. And this year's key focus is placed on sustainability and green innovation. So why it is so urgent to talk about film production in this context? Different than we might assume, film industry is in fact one of the larger contributors of carbon emissions, and acknowledging this responsibility, global film industry is increasingly working on solutions to reduce the carbon footprint along the production chain. That said, on behalf of the whole organizing team, I'm very pleased to bring together two experienced players in this field today, which are Emellie O'Brien and Merle Rueffer. But before I'm going to introduce further our today's two special guests and also say some words on our discussion format, I would like to first hand over the microphone to Isaac Martin for some welcoming words on behalf of US Embassy in Germany. Isaac Martin is a Foreign Service Officer with the US Department of State, and following previous assignments around the world in Bangkok, Manila, Ljubljana, and Kabul, he is currently based in Berlin as Assistant Cultural Affairs Officer at the US Embassy. Thank you so much for joining us. Isaac Martin, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Anna-Sophie Philippi, and for that really kind introduction. And thank you also to HessenFilm and the Film University Babelsberg for partnering with us, US Embassy and the Consul General in Frankfurt, on this great program. We are delighted that everyone who is joining us today is taking time to listen to this interesting discussion. And a special welcome goes out to our guest of honor, Emellie O'Brien, CEO and founder of the Brooklyn-based company Earth Angel, that advises small to large-scale film companies, VoD and TV productions. Emellie O'Brien and Merle Rueffer, who leads the Green Film Division of the State of Hesse's Film Fund, will present best practices for sustainable film production in the US and Germany and discuss challenges and opportunities in this field. The virtual program has been made possible with the gracious support of the American Film Showcase program administered by the USC, that's the University of Southern California, for those who didn't know, School of Cinematic Arts. And this program is also part of, as Anna-Sophie mentioned, Transatlantic Innovation Week, that the US Embassy and all of our 5 consulates in Germany have been working on this week. The friendship between the US and Germany has been at the forefront of innovation for decades, and driving us forward to a more modern, sustainable, and technologically advanced future. We work together in many ways to confront some of the world's most pressing challenges, and we're using Transatlantic Innovation Week to highlight German American leadership in innovation and answer questions like what transatlantic leaders are doing around the world to solve climate change. The Biden administration is working to reestablish US leadership and increase global commitments for tackling climate change at home and abroad. That is why this year's Transatlantic Innovation Weeks focuses on partnerships for our planet. The climate crisis endangers all of us, and we cannot fix it alone. Germany is also aware of this. And just earlier this month, on the 6th of April, it approved the largest energy policy package in the last 20 years to accelerate Germany's use of renewable energy. We share Germany's environmental concerns and face their shared challenges together. Like some of these challenges, like the revitalization of old mining areas, are just one example of the similar challenges that we both face. The United States and Germany are committed to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. We're taking decisive action to have a 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach and achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions across global economies by 2050. And as part of Transatlantic Innovation Week, I actually sat in on a very interesting net zero talk between the city of Heidelberg and the city of Burlington, Vermont. It's just one example of this kind of shared challenge and how we address it together. So as I said, we're in this together, and I look forward to a very interesting conversation between our two panelists today. Addressing climate is a multifaceted endeavor, and it goes all the way from greenhouse gases and our carbon footprints to what we do on film sets. And the global film industry is aware of this and taking up this challenge in reducing the carbon footprint of its own industry. So I'm particularly invited that I think there are several, or at least my colleagues tell me there are several film students who are our future users and our future occupants of film sets are joining us today. So please listen well to our experts. I'm sure they'll give you some great pointers as you blaze a trail for how we address this issue in years to come. And so now, without further ado, I'll toss it back to Anna-Sophie to kick off this great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you so much for those greetings. Before starting off now, let me put in front some few words on our discussion setup now. So what awaits us for the next 90 minutes, more or less. First, we'll have two short talks by each of our experts, which will provide us with different perspectives on the topic. And after the presentations, we will enter into a dialogue to dig a bit deeper and talk about the various facets of green film production, especially in the international co-production setup. You in the audience are explicitly invited to take part in this discussion too. You can do so by using the live chat on YouTube. And in case you would like to ask a question or to make a comment, please don't hesitate to do so via the chat. And my colleagues in the background keep following the chat, and I do my very best to keep up your contributions. So I don't want to waste any more of our time and introduce Emellie O'Brien and Merle Rueffer. As Isaac already said, Emellie is founder and CEO of Earth Angel. Earth Angel is a company based in Brooklyn that advises small to large scale film, VoD and TV productions in terms of sustainable strategies. Emellie O'Brien has a wide experience in developing measures to successfully reduce film production's environmental impact. She's doing so since 2011. She works with over 50 major motion picture projects. Her recent clients include the award-winning Amazon series, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Steven Spielberg's Oscar-nominated film, The Post, or The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And it's also to her credit that the latter is acclaimed the most eco-friendly blockbuster in Sony Pictures history. And in today's keynote, Emellie will give us some insights on the private and US-American sector's perspective and point to some best practices. Thank you, Emellie, for taking the time to share your knowledge with us this evening or this afternoon. After Emmellie's presentation, Merle Rueffer is going to talk on the topic from the German and also more from the institutional perspective. Merle is film commissioner at Hesse and green film consultant at HessenFilm. In this role, she also advises filmmakers on how to comply with the new minimum ecological standards that were introduced in Germany by a broad alliance of film and TV producers and institutions just recently in the beginning of this year. Merle Rueffer's background is in producing with a specialization on international co-productions. And moreover, she's an honorary founding member of the Youth Short Film Award called KONRAD. And she also teaches creative producing at the University of Applied Science in Düsseldorf here in Germany. Thank you so much, Merle, for also being here and sharing your expertise with us. So now to begin, Emellie, I would like to hand over the microphone to you. Please go ahead.
I was muted. There we go. Hello. Thank you so much, Anna-Sophie, for that lovely introduction. I'm very, very pleased to be here. Let me just pull up my presentation. Okay. So as was mentioned, my name is Emellie O'Brien. I am the founder and CEO of Earth Angel, based in Potsdam, but Earth Angel is providing services to film, television, commercial productions, as well as live events now throughout America, and we've done some international partners. So I'm really excited to be here today and share some of my experience from the U.S. side of things. So I first just like to kind of start off with this quote, because I think this is a really important element to consider when we're talking about climate solutions. Obviously, the science has been there for decades, showing that temperatures have been rising, and we are on track towards massive irreversible global tipping points. And I think that a lot of the challenge that we're facing now is, despite the data and the science being there for years, the message isn't resonating, right? And that's where I think that us as storytellers in this industry have a really, really vital role to play in the fight against climate change. And so, as this great quote from Amitav Ghosh says, it's a crisis of culture and thus of imagination. And so what better industry to be a part of this movement, to be tackling these types of issues, than one such as film and television, where we are imagining new stories all the time and presenting new possibilities all the time. So, just like to sort of anchor us in, like, what is that intersection when we're talking about the various climate change solutions that are out there. So many of you are probably familiar with the term sustainability. It means different things for different people, but I like to default to the UN's definition, which simply means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so what that looks like in a business case is this idea of the triple bottom line philosophy. So, our typical bottom line of profit, something most business people are familiar with, right? But in order for an industry to evolve into a sustainable model, we have to be looking at people, planet, and profit. And when all of those things are positive, right, we're having positive impacts in all of those regards, that's what we would call something sustainable. And so I think that an example I want to provide for you today is about New York. We do a lot of work in New York City. It is an iconic film destination for many reasons. And they put out their economic impact study in 2021 with these amazing statistics, right? New York City's film and television industry generated $64 billion in direct economic output in 2019. The industry accounts for 100,000 jobs and $12.2 billion in wages. And we're obviously doing a really good job of communicating the economic benefits of the industry. But what is the environmental impact? How much greenhouse gas emissions are we contributing towards the city every year? How much waste are we generating? These are the types of things we really want to be analyzing, and where there's a tremendous opportunity to be looking at this from like public and private partnership standpoints, like how are we helping our cities, our countries meet their ambitious climate goals as an industry as well. So some just general statistics to share with you from the data that we've gathered in our sample size of productions we've worked on. Our long form productions, so these are, larger studio-based, typically feature films or network series, are averaging about 1,000 metric tons of CO2 per production, generating up to 250 tons of waste, consuming up to 74,000 single-use plastic water bottles, and consuming over 500,000 gallons of fuel. So these numbers obviously multiplied times the amount of content that's being produced right now, pretty staggering in terms of the impact. But I think there's some important limitations that are worth mentioning when it comes to effectively integrating sustainability in the production world. The first one is the fact that we are a traveling circus, right? We're always on the go. We shoot in different locations all the time. It's not like a corporate office is taking sustainability measures and they're implementing them in this place they've been in for years and years and a place they're going to be in for years and years to come. We are a very short-term thinking industry. And so thinking about our long-term effects of how we're going to be impacting our communities and so forth, we're just not wired that way as a sector. So this is a real sort of like mental, physical challenge, of course, that we have to combat. The second limitation is, of course, that we are an industry of freelancers. So we have different people coming in and out of our projects at all times, many of which have various levels of knowledge around sustainability, around sustainable production practices. So there's this aspect of sort of constantly educating that is a really, really important facet to making sustainability work. The other factor is, of course, there's very, very limited publicly available data on what the industry's impact is. At least in the US, there's no mandatory disclosures. We're not required to track our carbon footprints and disclose what those are. There are some numbers I'm going to share with you in a bit, but of course, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so that's been a big hindrance. And then on the other side of things, there's a real psychological hurdle too, that I think is a really noteworthy component, which is that we as creatives tend to put our creative vision, sort of above everything. I don't want to say everything unilaterally, but you understand what I'm saying. And I think this can often lead to a phenomenon that I like to refer to as cinematic immunity. So because I'm working in the vision of this creative effort, the rules don't apply to me. And I think we've seen this in a lot of ways, especially in the US market, on the way that we manage safety on set, in the way that we manage gender and racial equality, both on the screen and behind the screen. And then the sustainability part of it is just as important and factored in there, right? Because sustainability is about the people and the planet as well. So these are all the same struggle, the fight to keep sets more safe, more inclusive, more, better labor standards, as well as to keep the sets themselves environmentally sustainable and thus healthier. So a big catalyst for us in the US was a report that was released by UCLA in 2006. This was the first ever published report on sustainability in the motion picture industry. It looked at specifically the Los Angeles metro area, so really dialing into just that geographic region and what the greenhouse gas emissions were from the motion picture industry. And the results were pretty staggering. It put the motion picture industry's emissions essentially on par with that of the aerospace industry in the Los Angeles metro area. So after this study came out, a lot started to happen. Most of the major Hollywood studios created green initiatives, hired officers of sustainability. We saw lots of different organizations cropping up. The PGA, Producers Guild of America, formed its Green Committee, which then created our Green Production Guide, our North American standard, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Lots of great European organizations, cropped up, EcoProd in France, the BAFTA Albert Consortium in the UK, as well as, you know, organizations like AdGreen focused on how do we make the commercial advertising sector more sustainable, and then other initiatives and organizations as well. So this is just a snapshot. There's many folks who are working on this, but you can sort of see how the timeline of this has progressed. And so going back to the Green Production Guide for a moment. So this is a phenomenal resource for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's greenproductionguide.com. It is sort of our North American standard. It's a partnership of almost all the major Hollywood studios and streamers, and an initiative out of the Producers Guild of America Green Committee. There's a variety of resources in there. There's best practices, there's a carbon calculator, there's memos, there's case studies, there's lots of really great things. And then that also contributes towards what our many US productions can then strive towards, which is the EMA Green Seal of recognition for meeting certain sustainability criteria. So this is just a glance of like what these tools look like. The peach is on the left-hand side, which stands for Production Environmental Action Checklist. It's a breakdown by department, so very specific departmental action items that you can take. So, you know, specific things that you can do as an electric or catering or within your production office, et cetera. And then it tallies up how many points that you got, you know, based on answering yes or no of what you have achieved. And that's how many points that are, you know, then awarded to be able to qualify for the EMA Green Seal that I mentioned. The other main tool that we utilize is the PAIR, Production Environmental Accounting Report. So this is essentially our industry's carbon calculator, looking at the 4 main impact categories of utilities, so the amount of electricity used, natural gas or heating oil, the amount of fuel consumed, both diesel, gasoline, propane, alternative fuels, etc., the amount of air travel flown, and the amount of housing and accommodations. So there's obviously carbon calculating is a very in-depth, robust science of its own. There's lots of different scopes to it. So this is our standard tool, but I will say there's a lot more that goes into environmental impact metrics and assessments as well. So this is a quick snapshot from a report that was released in March of 2021 from the SPA, or the Sustainable Production Alliance, which is the alliance of those major Hollywood studios and streamers. So this is a groundbreaking report because it was the first time ever in our industry's history that the studios put out a anonymized aggregate, you know, finding of their findings. And so you can see here for feature films on the left-hand side, it showed that the average carbon footprint was about 3,370 metric tons, or about 33 metric tons per shooting day. Large films had a footprint of about 1,081 metric tons, medium 769, and small about 391. So this type of data normalization is, you know, something that was very, very groundbreaking. And then we look at the television series side of things, and we can see that, you know, average carbon footprint per episode for 1 hour scripted dramas was 77 metric tons, half-hour single camera shows, 26 metric tons, half-hour multi-camera, 18, and then unscripted shows had a carbon footprint of 13 metric tons per episode. So this is very, very US centered sample size, I will say that, but nevertheless, really helpful kind of baseline numbers to go off of. So at Earth Angel, we look at a lot of different things when we're working with our shows. We're doing carbon tracking, waste management programs, energy efficiency programs, fuel reduction, education, and then sourcing and supply chain. We offer these services in a variety of ways, and in terms of corporate consulting, production sustainability programs, both long form and short form, Good Riddance, which is specifically our programs where we help repurpose and donate materials when productions are striking, eco labs, education panels, seminars, etc. And then our zero waste kits, which are our sort of products that we'll rent in our various markets that we work in. We've worked on a lot of different productions over the years, you know, network television series, major feature films. This is just a small kind of sample size. And we've also worked with pretty much every single Hollywood studio and streamer at this stage as well. And we work all over the world. Our major hubs are, you know, we're headquartered in New York. We do a lot in Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Toronto. I've also recently been doing more work in Vancouver and New Orleans. And then we have a lot of international partners that we align with. So it's not uncommon for one of our major television series to film for 10 weeks in New York and then do 4 weeks in Italy, for example. And you know, obviously with the rise of co-productions, this is becoming more and more common. And so we like to have partners around the world to try to keep the program really consistent throughout and tracking the impact and the progress as we go, no matter where we are. We also focus on our 4 kind of components that create our model, as we call it, which is the strategy, staff, stuff, and stats. So really coming up with, you know, how do we take principles of sustainability and translate that into like actionable things that people can do on the ground, specific and unique to that particular production, knowing that every production is its own very unique unicorn, right? There is no one size fits all solution. So there has to be flexibility and adaptability there. On the staff side of things, we work to recruit, train, and staff various eco production assistants and coordinators with the various shows we work with. On the stuff side of things, we look at, you know, what are the supplies that the production's purchasing and can they be sourced more sustainably, and where is that material going, you know, trying to find end of life solutions for that. And then of course, all the reporting and analytics with stats. So that kind of comprises, and we have different specialists kind of focus on each of those things within Earth Angel. Some of our impact to date, and these numbers actually have not been updated to reflect 2021 impact, so these are even higher now, but 9,000 metric tons of CO2 avoided, over 135,000 meals served to local food banks, and over 2 million plastic water bottles avoided by our productions. So obviously there's just some basics that, you know, we advise to all our productions, regardless of where you're filming and what you're doing. And, you know, everyone's probably very familiar with like the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. You know, we obviously want to start with like, how can we reduce the amount of material, reduce the amount of energy, reduce the amount of fuel we need, you know, to make this production possible. So that requires, you know, meeting with department heads early on and understanding like what are their needs, what are alternatives, and trying to come up with solutions there. Obviously, then we're going to look at, you know, reusing, and can we take materials that this other production is using that's just wrapping, and how can we incorporate that onto our production, and keep that sort of like circular material exchange happening as well. And then as a last resort, you know, we come up with a lot of recycling programs, specialty recycling programs, composting programs. It's a lot of great initiatives that likely exist in your regions that, you know, are all about kind of connecting the dots and tapping into logistically, how can we collect these waste streams? How can we, you know, work with those providers on the ground to service them? And then powering down, obviously a big one that impacts every department, and everyone's using energy to some degree, but this is a big one that we advise across the board and on a basic level. You know, some more general best practices that we advise, again, this is regardless of department. I'm not going to go into department specifics because that would require its own separate, I think, conversation today. But, you know, having clearly labeled waste streams and waste management set up, you know, battery and specialty recycling programs, like where are those specialty items harder to recycle things going? How can we create collection streams for those and dispose of those responsibly? Every single department has an opportunity to do material donations, whether even if that's like the grip and electric departments who think that their scrap gels are garbage, but in reality, a film student would love to be able to utilize them. There's a lot of different use cases we can make for things that would otherwise be considered trash. And then obviously the eco-friendly transportation options are huge. You probably saw from the graph I showed previously, fuel is the #1 source contribution to a production's carbon footprint. Over and over again, it is fuel. So where we can reduce the amount of vehicles we need, encourage more sustainable crew transport options, have alternative vehicles and so forth. This is a big thing that we have to really look at transitioning into from a clean energy standpoint as an industry. And then lastly, I just want to really encourage folks to kind of think outside the box when it comes to sustainability too. Like, this isn't just about doing less harm, it's also about doing more good. How can we be leaving a positive impact on the communities that we're filming in? And some examples here from projects we worked on was, when we worked on the film Noah with Darren Aronofsky and Russell Crowe, Hurricane Sandy hit New York, and we redirected our catering trucks to Coney Island to, serve hot meals to hurricane victims, and, in lieu of a catered breakfast that day for our crew members. With other productions, we've teamed up with music festivals who've been able to repurpose a lot of our set items that we would have otherwise thrown into the trash, that those music festivals have been able to utilize and incorporate into their designs and what have you. And then another international production we worked with called The Queen of Katwe, which filmed in Uganda and South Africa, able to partner with different organizations that were actually taking our single-use plastics and being able to make these physical structures with them, and these like plastic brick structures. And, how can we tie into those like local community efforts, again, to leave the places we're filming actually better than we found them ideally. And some barriers, obviously we'll touch on this, but, the motivation is a big one. In the US, we don't have any laws or regulations that are mandating that productions have to follow sustainability guidelines. We don't have any fiscal incentives that are encouraging them to do it. And we also don't have the consumer demand that a lot of other industries have. So, audiences aren't choosing to watch a film or television series because it was filmed sustainably. And so that is something that we have to figure out. How do we create other levers of change and demand more internally? And then, of course, there's the misconceptions of like, it's too hard and it costs too much, which are just like some of the most common misconceptions that we're always trying to, debunk. And so I just want to leave you with this very great quote from Grace Hopper, a US Navy Admiral, and one of the first female computer scientists. And it's just, boils down to, the most dangerous phrase in languages, we've always done it this way. And, we are a creative sector. We're capable of achieving amazing, innovative, stories and we create amazing worlds. We can do this, right? Like, we have the creative knowledge and power and resources at our disposal. It means changing things slightly, but, it's dangerous. There is no film on a dead planet, right? It's dangerous to think about if we keep staying on the current track we're on in a business as usual case. And so this is our information. I encourage people to reach out to us. And sorry, I know I went a little bit over my time, but I'll hand it back over to you, Anna-Sophie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Emellie, for your great talk, and also for visualizing the different aspects of the problem for us. I made plenty of notes on possible topics we could further discuss on. But before, I'm curious about the aspects Merle Rueffer might have to add, especially from the German perspective now. So Merle, I would like to hand over the microphone to you now.
Thank you very much, Anna-Sophie. Just a second, I will pull up my slides. So again, well, thank you very much for the kind introduction and also inviting me to be part of this discussion tonight. As already mentioned, my name is Merle Rueffer. I'm the film commissioner of the state of Hesse and the green film advisor at HessenFilm. And since climate change doesn't know borders, I'm very happy to exchange ideas on green production across the Atlantic. So in my short presentation, I will give you a little insight of measures that we at HessenFilm and all the other supporters of the Green Motion label have committed to since 1st of January of this year. Speaking about green production, it is important to speak about responsibility. Cinema, TV, and online VOD productions cause high emissions and use up substantial amounts of resources. And I think by changing to a more eco-friendly production system, many emissions can easily be avoided. So for this reason, the Alliance of German key industry representatives of the film, TV, and VOD market have decided to produce a large part of their content in a climate and resource-friendly manner. But before we dive a bit deeper into the standards itself, and it's gonna be a little honestly dry theory, I will give you some numbers on the way to give all these measures a little bit of a horizon. So as the Producers Alliance of Germany report in their survey from 2018, the German film industry counts 900 production companies, a turnover of 15 billion euros per year. German films were funded with 341.2 million euros, 247 released films in theaters. The average budget of motion picture films is 2.8 million euros, so a lot less from what we saw on the US side just now. The average funding share sums up to 45% of the total budget. And the average funding share of broadcasters sums up to 11% of the total budget. But, well, we can't talk about the ecological minimum standards without mentioning the working group that within this green shooting working group, broadcasters, production companies, VOD services, film funding entities have developed these standards together with amazing leading experts such as Philipp Gassmann, Professor Dirk Notz, and Niels König. And together, and for me, it's very important to say that they have developed a uniform standards that are one of a kind and committed to comply with them. So let's talk about the standards itself. A short remark up front, discussing the standards in detail would exceed my 10-minute time frame by far. So I will give you a more simplified introduction on these. So if you wish more, please feel free to contact me on these anytime. So as you can see in my presentation, there's 15 categories. 21 of these are mandatory specifications. To receive the Green Motion label for your production, at least 18 of these specifications must be met. First of all, the basics. So personally, I advise all productions to meet the requirement of employing a green consultant on their project. With their help, a big impact can be made already in the production development phase. Accounting. Emissions must be calculated before and after completion of the production. For this, a free of charge emission calculator can be used, and I will be happy to share the link with you upon request. After completion of the production, a final report has to be prepared with the documentation of all measures of the production. And whenever it gets technical or to a point where technology or sustainable economy is still developing existentially, the working group, additionally to the mandatory specification, define targets which will step by step become mandatory specifications in the future. So green electricity certainly is a field that is ongoingly developing. So mandatory already is the usage of certified green electricity in all production facilities during all phases of production. And the target defines that in case of temporary premises, certified green electricity should be used whenever it's possible. The generators are quite a complex subject, so I tried to break it down for you, but in general, it said no diesel generators may be used in studio-based entertainment productions, and whenever a network connection is possible, you should use it. The target defines that a grid connection whenever possible, green energy generators should be given preferences, diesel generators must be equipped with certain requirements such as particle filters and so on. Number 6 is, I always call it the easy one with a big impact, is the rechargeable batteries. Disposable batteries may not be used during the entire production, either on set or in the production offices and studios. And in category 7, lighting, you can see that until now, this category only has a target, since it's a very, very complex subject. It states that only LED headlights or other light sources with comparable efficiency should be used for studio productions and on-site shooting. One of the biggest factors of high emissions is travel and transportation. So, to be brief, flights must be avoided if corresponding train journey would take less than 5 hours. If your fleet has more than 2 cars, at least 30% of the cars must be low on emissions. For example, the usage of electric or hybrid cars. And every diesel vehicle must comply with the diesel Euro 6 standards without any exceptions. And it targets that all flights should be avoided in general. Rail, public transport, bicycles, and e-bikes should be used whenever possible. And as many cars and trucks on the fleet should be low emission vehicles. Accommodation can also make a huge change. Mandatory is already that accommodation with recognized environmental measures must be booked for at least 50% of overnight stays, provided that they're located within 15 kilometers of the production site. In the future, it is, whenever it's possible, accommodation with recognized environmental measures should be booked. And a short remark on this, many hotel chains already have environmental measures. So before booking, it might make sense to ask your hotel of your choice about environmental program. If they don't already have one, they might consider it in the future. So, well, catering, the heart of every set, I always say. It's mandatory if provided, the catering is provided by external catering service, that at least 50% of the food must be produced locally and consist of organic products. Locally means in that term that it has to be produced within a range of 100 kilometers. At least 1 veggie day per week, and all crew members must be involved in the food selection progress. So it might turn out that many crew members prefer more veggie days than originally intended. No disposable crockery or single-use bottles allowed during entire production. And the future targets that consumption of meat should be reduced as much as possible, and adjusting the food portions is advisable to avoid food being thrown away. Paper, the credo is recycling. If paper is used, it must be recycled with a recycled fiber content of at least 90%. Instead, paper documents should be avoided and all production documents should be digital. And speaking about materials and supplies, again, it gets a little more complex since building materials is still a huge financial factor, unfortunately, I must add. So mandatory, if you have to use new wood or new wood-based materials, these must come from sustainably managed forests and have the FSC label. The future targets that backdrops, decorative objects, materials should be reusable. Materials and substances that pollute the environment, such as PVC, styrofoam, etc., should not be used, and the preference should be given to materials with a high percentage of recyclates. Different base materials should be combined in such a way that they can easily be separated from another to guarantee recycling. When it comes to costumes, I can make it short and to be brief. Costumes should be reusable. Fast fashion should be avoided at all costs. So is the next category. Actually, it's plastic. Disposable plastic should generally be avoided in all production areas and replaced by more environmentally friendly solutions, where only makeup products without microplastics should be used. The final category regulates waste sorting. The waste produced must be separated at every production facility, including on-site in all studios and offices. And in the future, decorations cannot be reused, should be separated into the base materials when disposed. So if you want to produce or co-produce in or with Germany, these informations might be useful to you. The minimum standards apply to all productions receiving production funding. Production parts that take place in Germany, regardless of whether the production company is located in Germany or abroad, and if possible, compliance with these minimum standards abroad is welcomed and also encouraged. If the report is approved, the production with parts thereof produced in Germany is then authorized to use the label Green Motion, provided that either the production costs incurred abroad account for less than 25% of the total production costs, or at least 18 of the 21 mandatory requirements have been met abroad. So, well, enough with the numbers. And last but not least, I want to give you a short overview of all the committing partners and supporting standards at the Green Motion that support the Green Motion label. So if you're planning to work with one of these companies or funders, your production has to comply with these standards. And the good news is they're getting more and more every week, every month. So I want to quote Emellie on this. We can do this, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Merle, for providing us with this great overview on the recent German achievements, and also to draw our attention to several important issues we should take into consideration when talking about green film production, especially in Germany, but not only. Maybe we could start off by comparing now the German and the US model. And again, in case you in the audience, in case you would like to pose a question or make a comment, please don't hesitate to do so via the chat. Maybe to start off, Emellie, in Germany, like as Merle just explained, we will be implementing binding minimum standards in film production on a federal level, and as a consequence, committing to a green production mode will be a mandatory requirement to achieve federal film funding. Emellie, what are your first thoughts on the aspects Merle pointed at? Maybe you could point also to main differences, also commonalities between this path taken and the strategies in the US film production sector.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think, my initial thoughts are, I think it's wonderful that it's going to be a requirement of, getting the film funding. I think that, setting the stage for that from the onset, so filmmakers are encouraged and they're incorporating that into part of their planning, their production planning, their budgeting. That's the key to make this really successful is, incorporating it as early as possible. What I always tell our productions is as soon as there's money being exchanged, as soon as transactions are happening, you're making decisions on sustainability. right? Those choices of whether you're gonna fly or take the train is a choice around sustainability, you know, even if that's just like preliminary pre-production or scouting or, you know, whatever that looks like. So I think that's phenomenal. And that is something that I would love to see. Obviously the model in the US is very different because, you know, we're privately funded. However, we have the film tax incentives that come from public bodies, you know, and that's why New York, for example, is such a prominent film destination. It's why Georgia is such a prominent film destination. It's because they're giving, you know, tax rebates of, you know, up to 30, sometimes more than 30% on qualified production spend. And so when we're talking about, you know, a $50 million movie or something like that, that's a substantial sum of money that they're getting back. And my dream, and I've talked to a lot of people about this who work in this space in the States, is to have there be some type of connection with the film tax incentive rebate and sustainability. I think that obviously the concern in the States is that it's a very political thing. You know, people lobby to have those tax credits renewed every year. And so we don't want to jeopardize it for fear of like, we lose the jobs that are there. We lose, you know, small businesses lose revenue if someone chooses to film in a different state than, you know, than the state that they're in. But nevertheless, I think that there are really exciting, you know, clean energy incentives that are happening for us at the state level and things like that, that I think our industry, we're just not connecting the dots between like our industry's impact there and what those other industry incentives are. And so that's something I'm really excited to explore. And we have a contract with the mayor's office of media entertainment in New York City and developing the Film Green program, and that those are the types of like high level stakeholder, multi-stakeholder initiatives that I think really help, you know, push the needle in a much more powerful way for us. So yeah, in summary, you know, I applaud the work that you know, Merle, you're doing and HessenFilm and doing, and I think that's those are the types of standards that just need to become a baseline, right? Like that's just everyone gets to get to that level, and that's what I'm really excited to start to achieve.
Thank you. And maybe just like another question, because I think maybe we are already touching like our first point here. We've been talking about giving incentives, providing incentives to change something, but yeah, would it also be some kind of like a solution to also think about imposing sanctions? What is your opinion on that, or do you have any experience with that?
Well, I think that Americans tend to respond better to incentives than sanctions. So that's, you know, just my 2 cents there. But you know, I think that that's sort of like the age-old question, right? The carrot or the stick, which do we have? And to me, in a dream world, it's sort of both, you know. But I think that again, there's sensitivity around like jeopardizing. Everyone's very excited by the boom in content that's being made, and it's creating a lot of jobs and it's doing a lot of good. And so I'm always cautious around framing sustainability in a way that is going to, you know, people will perceive as it being limiting, right? Rather than there being opportunity. There's abundance, there's opportunity to figure out, you know, how we create this content just in more sustainable ways. So in my personal opinion, I think incentives are a better way to get everybody on board faster. But I do think that once we start to meet those thresholds of baselines, like absolutely, like I want to get to a place in the not so distant future where you're just not allowed to use diesel generators. That would be amazing, you know, and that's going to be a very, very hard lift for us in the States in particular, but, you know, is a really important target that I think we need to be setting.
Thank you. Merle, like maybe we can now get back to the German standards. When I was studying the catalog for the German minimum standards, I got the impression, like I appreciate it, but I got the impression that the green film production is mainly understood in terms of green shooting and focusing on ecological aspects of sustainability. But sustainability is neither like demanded in terms of social or economic terms, and it's not addressing choices in storytelling neither. So one could also claim that sustainability is a project which should be thought through in an all-embracing manner, including also those social, economic, and also maybe storytelling aspects. So I was thinking, like, aren't the current German standards too pragmatic, maybe, or too short-sighted in focusing only on the ecological dimension?
So I think there are two sides of the medallion, because I mean, of course, these standards, if I present them or if one of my colleagues presents them, they sound quite theoretical, quite dry, and it is, of course, it's a dry tool to become more sustainable, to become an industry with less of a big footprint on our planet. So I think these measures that we are taking, they sound very dry, but at one point you have to start. And I think the bigger goal that these minimum standards are transporting is that we are trying to embrace a new thinking of producing, meaning that at the earliest stage possible, you have to rethink film production. We have to reinvent how to produce films. And as Emellie just said, as soon as money is being spent, and I love the idea, you have to start thinking green. And it's not a matter of storytelling or whatever. If you start early enough, I'm sure that that it can be done, and it has to be done at some point. And this is the tool that has been developed, and I'm looking forward to seeing films being produced under this label. There have been the 100 green productions that were the role model for these minimum standards, yeah, I'm looking very much forward to actually have some numbers on these projects, to actually have some footprints, to have some emissions, and so on. And content-wise, I wouldn't dare to say that storytelling has to, take a step down. I think it's the opposite. We just had event with the German film commissions yesterday, which we host on regular basis, called Keen to be Green, where we invite professionals and this time broadcasters on the subject: is green filming, is it a huge financial factor? And I want to quote this one speaker of the event who said that, if we are producing more sustainable, we get a more valuable product in the end. And I think this is the importance of it.
Yeah, but maybe the question also could be like what Emellie said in her talk, that the audience mainly does not value this, like the ecological fact of a film production or a TV production, that it's not important for their decisions to go to the movies to watch this film or the other. The green label maybe won't help them in their decision. Yeah, but Merle, how do you perceive the German position on an international level? Is Germany like a pioneer now, like having these standards, or how do you perceive us or the Germans?
I don't know, honestly. I mean, I think there's different ways, and there's all over the world is the same goal, right? Is to reduce the emissions. And this is the tool we are using now. If it works and how good it works, we don't know that yet. So I am not in the position to say we're pioneers or whatever, but we're trying. And I think, yeah, I think one of the most important thing is to be brave and try to experiment with these new tools. And let's see. I'm optimistic, of course, but yeah, it's a try.
Maybe Emellie can help us and talk about her perspective on Germany.
Well, I haven't had the pleasure of filming in Germany, although I would love that pleasure at some point in the near future. But, you know, the impression I have is that, you know, I think that a lot of the film commissions and you know, stakeholders in Germany have been paying attention to this for quite some time. And, you know, I know we talked about this earlier, but, you know, green film shooting originated out of Germany and you know, and was supported with the Hamburg Film Fund. And that's something that's recognized internationally, you know, the Green Film Shooting magazine, for example, and highlighting case studies of sustainable production and triumphs in that regard. So that's like one of the only sort of publications that I know of that's like uniquely focused on this type of subject matter. And so, yeah, the green film shooting cards and the standards, I think, have been something that Germany's done a tremendous job of, and I think has certainly been a European leader in this space for quite some time.
Maybe we can now like switch to this international co-production setup, which actually is like one of our main topics today, and it's quite like a specific case. Maybe international co-production are like becoming obviously more and more important, also in financing film projects, but they're also quite complex. And they're complex setups which require a lot of bureaucratic work in attending the different federal or local, state, whatever laws and conditions. And yeah, you both know this better than I do. So maybe let's take for an example the carbon balancing thing Emellie also mentioned. It's one thing to recognize that calculating a project's carbon footprint is a useful tool to tackle emissions, but it is another to agree on how to conduct this calculation, not to mention the different approaches to compensate for those emissions. So Emellie, how do you perceive the current debate on green film production on an international level? What are the main agreements maybe between different countries on different levels, but what are also the main disagreements so far?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, my experience is more limited, obviously, in like a US the country of the United States and then a European country sort of doing a co-production has been my experience. But I know that there are different nuances when you have European countries, you know, having co-productions together. So I don't have as much experience in that regard, but I will say from the US European side of things, you know, it's a challenge, right? Because then the co-production model exists because they're trying to encourage, you know, the economic growth throughout different countries, cross-cultural collaborations, obviously very beneficial for the creative sectors and so on. But the downside of that is obviously that people are traveling more, you know, and that's the reality that we have to kind of face. And so by encouraging co-productions, which have all of these phenomenal economic and cultural benefits, you know, we are inevitably encouraging travel. And, you know, for a country like the US, it's like you've got to get on a plane. Like there's just some people who are going to have to fly. And the air travel piece of it, remains an enormous challenge for every industry, right? It's like we can reduce as much as we can in so many different areas, and we can take an advantage of renewable energy, and we can do all this, but at the end of the day, almost every single major business and corporation is going to have to fly people at some point or another. It's just like a very hard thing to work around. And so, until we reach the era of, all renewable, sustainable aviation, which I would love us to reach sooner rather than later. That is one of those things, like when we calculate a production's carbon footprint, like that's one of the things that it's just like, oh, it's so hard to, like, maybe we flew half as many people as we needed to fly, and we reduced in that sense. And we flew economy rather than first class. And, we did as best as we could, but there's still that portion that it's going to have to be offset somehow. So I think that's one of the big challenges when it comes to sustainability and co-productions. But I also think there's a lot of opportunity with sustainability and co-productions, because it opens the door for phenomenal collaboration too. We're able to look at how Germany's doing these amazing waste management programs, and then look at how France is doing it too. And they're piloting this new energy system in the UK, or in Sweden. Like, how can we sort of learn from one another and exchange best practices? So I think there's like anything, it's not a cut and dry thing. It's like there's pros, there's cons, and but I think for those co-production agreements at the bureaucratic level, to kind of have that awareness of like, well, how can we be encouraging this, and how can we make sure that this is applied, regardless of where you're filming, you're applying the same standards of environmentalism and community impact.
Thank you, Emellie. Meanwhile, I got two questions from the audience, which I would like to pick up right now. And as far as I got it, they're questions to Merle, and on the minimum standards, like focusing on the minimum standards. The first question is HessenFilm. I'm going to read it out. HessenFilm has 45% of film funding is public. Hessen's film, 45% of film funding is public funding. Wouldn't it be easiest to move sustainable producing more quickly if it would be mandatory? And the second question, maybe I can add it because it's from the same person. The funders have the power if they want to use it. The funders have the power if they wanted to use it. No. So why are there only minimum standards for a label instead of a mandatory requirement for funding, period?
I'm going to have to ask, because I'm not sure if I got the question right. So the question is why the minimum standards don't apply to all production levels, or
as far as I got it, it's like why they're not mandatory so far.
Well, they are. HessenFilm is one of the funding institutions that state that it's mandatory to meet the minimum standards if you apply for funding since January 1st of this year. January 1st of next year, it's going to be on federal level. But since this year, it's already an alliance of, for example, Netflix, ZDF, ARD, the Hamburg Film Fund, Moin, and so on. So it already is. And
maybe like to dig a bit deeper on the term minimum standards, because this is only also a question. So why are there only minimum standards?
Well, well, it's I mean, it's of course it's a term, and it's these of course, we should all aim for maximum standards, of course, but it's these, it's a kind of a tool. It's a quite dry tool, but it has to be defined. And again, as I stated at the beginning of my presentation, it is quite a one-of-a-kind alliance of so many partners figuring out the same rules that apply for all productions. And it not only applies funding institutions, but also VOD and TV. So combining them all and finding regulations that fit or that are not only in theory that sound good, but also that which are realistic to comply with. And this is, I think, one of the most important things, that, you know, you have to be positive on these, and you also have to, you know, see that it is doable to, and it's possible to comply with these minimum standards, which, of course, I mean, it's a title, yeah.
Okay, then let's try now to hypothetically think of a German-US-American co-production to get back to this topic. And let's suppose like the next Spider-Man, as Emellie has some experience with Spider-Man. So let's suppose the next Spider-Man movie is to be shot partly here in the Babelsberg studios. And we just learned that the minimum ecological standards in Germany are mandatory, also for international co-productions, but only for the parts shot in Germany. Yeah, I understood correctly. But how would this work out in practical terms? For example, like, would it be necessary for a German green consultant on set? Would it be necessary that it's a German green consultant who's familiar with the German conventions, or could it possibly be an employee of Emellie's agency? Maybe Merle, you can, or Emellie, you could help me to think how this could work.
Yeah, no, I love this hypothetical scenario here. So, you know, the way that I would go about approaching it. So, if Earth Angel's working with this production on the US side, you know, we've set up our protocols and you know, met with our department heads, and we're tracking all that information. And then, you know, I would reach out to someone like Merle, and I would say, you know, we're filming in Germany, and you know, we would want a German consultant working with us, you know, somebody who understands the lay of the land and the suppliers there, and you know, understands this. Every film set has its own culture to it too. So a lot of what we do in our day-to-day work is about, you know, making recommendations to people. Well, your recommendations only go so far. And it's like, are they going to actually be adapted, right? And so being able to meet people on their level of, you know, understanding what their demands are, you know, because a lot of crew members are, you know, they work really long hours, they're up against tight budget constraints, they, you know, so our approach is always one of, you know, like we tell people, like, we're not here to be the green police of the set, we're here to be a resource to you. How can we help you? Like, what are your challenges? And if they're like, well, you know, I don't have the time to research what a sustainable alternative for this is. And then it's like, okay, great. Like, let us do that for you. Like, what's your price range? When do you need stuff by? What does that look like? And like, let us help do that for you. So that's the kind of approach that we take, and knowing how critical the role of the consultant is in terms of like, will those recommendations actually be adopted? That's something that I think just requires a very sort of like finesse and you know, and people skill of like knowing the language, knowing the landscape there, etc. So that would be our ideal approach. And then like, we have a strategy meeting with that German consultant, and we say, okay, here's what we achieved in the US, here's what we'd like to translate, what does that look like for you, what's feasible, what's not feasible, You know, how are we going to track these different metrics from project to project? So this is very similar to, you know, we've a project going in the UK right now. It's very similar to how we've been doing in France and South Africa. So those types of situations where we tell them, you know, you are the expert of what happens in your region, where like, we don't want to step on your toes. We want to just sort of create consistency on, you know, what the goals are and make sure that we're tracking and reporting on everything.
Mm-hmm. And Merle, how would it look like from your perspective, from your side?
Mm-hmm.
Like international production, maybe in Frankfurt, not in Babelsberg.
Yeah, well, I couldn't speak for Babelsberg. I can only speak for my region. So I think the approach is great to work with local advisors, to work with local consultants, especially when it comes to reusing materials, for example, and you have the knowledge of your location and so on. You have the contacts and so on. I think this is the part where, you know, the Film Commission and the Green Filming Advisory meet quite well, because, you know, I would, of course, offer a structure of contacts to Emellie, for example, you know, and provide her with green consultants in our region, and also provide her with information regarding, let's say, technological things like a hyperbole, which can make, for example, a huge impact on green producing, you know, if you don't have to travel for every shot and so on. So yeah, I think this is how a successful and also green production could be planned, you know, with the local structure, but of course, you know, always exchanging ideas across the globe, and also, you know, learning from each other and knowing the local structure as one of the most important things, I think.
Mm-hmm. Learning from each other is like a good keyword for next question. I was thinking about we can continue thinking about possible scenarios now of how to cooperate, and just recently, maybe it was the same event Merle was participating yesterday or the day before, but just recently I was following a German panel on green shooting, and there I learned that one of the major problems of reaching sustainability goals in Germany, or in the German context, is that we are lacking the necessary technological innovations and also resources to conduct this whole ecological turn on all stages. So Emellie, are you at Earth Angels confronted with similar problems or objectives in the US? And is it also part of your mission to act in the field of technological innovations? Could you maybe talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a fantastic question. Yes, this is certainly something that is impacting us in the US as well. You know, a big challenge is just infrastructure. You know, we have these sound stages, these massive sound stages that we film in. And, you know, a lot of times, as is the case in New York, these are buildings that were not built to be sound stages. They are warehouses that we converted to being sound stages. You know, they're decades old. They run super inefficiently. They lack the, you know, the power load demands that we need to efficiently light, heat, and cool the spaces as well. But because we're temporary tenants of that space, we're only occupying it for, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 months. We have very little, you know, persuasion over, you know, how this soundstage operator is going to invest in retrofitting in his energy efficiency, right? But I think that, which isn't to say we can't have influence there, we absolutely can, right? Like if a production comes in, and especially I think this is what's really exciting is like oftentimes in the States, we have studios that will rent the same space over and over and over again for different projects. And so then you can look at, okay, Warner Brothers is coming in and they're going to have 3 back-to-back feature films filming in this space. What if we took the amount that we would need to upgrade, to get as much house power from the grid as we could and get away from generators or whatever it is. But we spread that investment out over multiple projects, or, there are creative economic ways of doing this, but it requires that long-term thinking and foresight that is just not ingrained in, most production teams. Most production teams are just like very focused on, I have to get done what I need to get done in my time frame, in my budget. So that's a big part of it. And then, also on the innovation front comes, the clean tech and the electrification side of things, which is a massive struggle for us in the States and a lot of territories that we're working in. We can't rent electric vehicles in most of like the cities that we're working in. There's so few EV charging stations are available to us. So I think it's 2 parts. It's like a lot of times the technological innovation is there. We just haven't seen it grow, like the infrastructure develop around it, that we can access it readily, given the short-term transient nature of our industry. But then I also think that there's plenty of room to continue to innovate beyond that as well. I think, I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing in terms of like the virtual production side of things, and, just getting, again, more creative with, materials and circularity and how do we track that and repurpose that there. So yeah, I think it's sort of like a twofold thing when it comes to the innovation.
Thank you, Emellie. Yeah, I'm afraid we have like slowly come to an end, but maybe we can take some time for some last like comments. Maybe you too can give us some like final remarks on the topic, and maybe because I'm coming from a film university, I'm a lecturer at a film university, so I'm like especially curious about how your perspective on the responsibility of film schools. So maybe you can like include this in your last final comment, and maybe Merle, you can start.
Of course. Well, I think one of the most important things is in green production is to start early, and it doesn't only affect producers that are very experienced, and we're hypothetically speaking about Spider-Man co-productions and so on. It's starting early means also learning green production from scratch. So I'm very happy that you are the person interviewing us here today or moderating this event, because I mean, it is, for the film students, I can imagine that it's super important to learn tools and to figure out, the small impacts you can have with green production, like not using disposable batteries, for example, or using eco-friendly power and so on. It's, you can do so little with so much with so little. And I think this is quite important. And thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Merle. And I think, absolutely the goal with having, film schools are a major stakeholder in this industry. You are grooming the future generations of filmmakers. And as someone who's a previous film student, an NYU alum, the way that we're taught how to approach the craft is just, it's so important. And I think what I'm really encouraged by is, there's stuff in the US now, like the Green Film School Alliance, where a lot of the film schools are coming together to, support best practices and implement this as like standard operating procedure now, which I think is phenomenal. And I think that that's the goal, right, is to have these young people graduate film school just thinking that this is the standard. Like it isn't green filmmaking, it's just filmmaking. It's just like how I was taught to make films. And I think I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing there. We actually have, we worked with NYU to do a like basic training course kind of thing for film students on this that will hopefully be released in the coming months too, that I think will be a great resource for other film schools. And yeah, I think that it's, you know, they're the future, and we want them engaged in this topic and on board from the get-go. So yeah, I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to have this discussion today, and thank you for these wonderful questions. And Merle, great to hear your take and perspective on things as well. So this has been lovely.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your fantastic talks in the beginning, and now the great discussions we had, and all the insights you provided. And I'm pretty sure we will continue reflecting and discussing on the things we just talked about. On behalf of the whole organizing team, I warmly recommend all of you to visit again the Transatlantic Innovations Week's website, because tomorrow will be the last, the program's final day. So maybe you don't want to miss this opportunity. And thank you for participating in today's discussions. And yeah, have a nice rest of the evening or the day, depending where you are. And I would be glad to maybe meet some of you in person someday.
Recording stopped.